I do real hard sugar. What's that other one? They're both yeah, there's Coke Zero.
I feel like we're not setting a good example when we're.
They should be damp. Everyone should.
Hey.
Put it in a cup. That's what
It's that or you want me to get Red Bulls instead? I actually, that's what I usually do. Is keep it here. Of course, then I had a non-opaque glass, and someone said it looks like you're drinking scotch.
Okay. Otherwise,
yeah, there you go. That's exactly what I thought. I should switch.
we don't I don't think there's any problems there.
Okay, let's get started.
Yeah.
Welcome. Welcome to a special session of the board. First, just a couple logistical comments. Yesterday, you may know we had a closed session, and we announced at the end of closed session that we took no reportable action, but I'm repeating that now in case there wasn't anyone who stood outside and waited for us to say that. We're scheduled to go till 6 o'clock today. We are going to hold fast to that 6 o'clock. It's second night of Rosh Hashanah. We want to make sure people get out of here on time for that. If for some reason we need to continue this meeting, that is an option to us, but I'm going to try and keep us in this time envelope. With respect to how we're going to flow these next couple of hours, we have our team from Cozen O'Connor here who will go through their presentation with us, share their findings. Then we'll stop and invite public comment. There's cards on the table over there against the wall. Some of you have already filled them out and handed them over. During the presentation, I'd be grateful if you want to say something afterwards, if you'd fill out a card, leave it in that basket. That way we'll know how many cards we have, and we can pace ourselves to get through the comment section of our agenda. Also, if you're a student, there's a little box that you want to check student on because we like to let the students go first. All right. As a reminder, this agenda item is specific to the investigation of the investigation, as we like to say. This is not into the event itself, but into the handling of it by the district. And we're using this as a lens to look at the way we handle this sort of occurrence across the board. There are other investigations underway, and those are specific to specific events, but this is, as they say, an investigation of an investigation. Back in May, when we launched this, the board committed to sharing the results of this investigation to the extent possible. The Cozen O'Connor team is here with their findings. We are asking Ms. Smith and Ms. Gomez to please add names to the titles before they present so that you know who's being addressed in these findings. So maybe if you could just go through the titles you've used and attach names to those titles, that would help us keep everyone straight before you get started. With that said, I think we are ready to get started. Take it away.
That formal parliamentary jargon.
Take it away.
Take it away.
Yes.
Thank you. Members of the board and interested community members, thank you. My name is Gina Maisto Smith, and with my colleague Leslie Gomez, I'm here today to present to you what you may have seen already online. The draft report was posted online. Given the time constraints, we will give you our high-level overview of our findings, and we will be prepared to answer board questions. In May, as you know, we were engaged by the board, and this board committed to understand what happened in response to an institutional response to a Title IX report. We will not be using names of students, and we will stay away from student privacy based on federal protections. But I want you to know that from the context of how we approach our work, we come to this work by virtue of committing to the understanding of sex and gender-based violence, child abuse, elder abuse in the institutional setting for about 50 years. And in approaching this work, we look at very carefully the law or the regulatory framework. We look at very carefully the psychology of these issues and why we have the law and those frameworks. And then in the context of an institution, we take good care to look at the institutional culture, personnel, policies, procedures, and practices. And with our commitment to everything that we've done in the several decades that we've done this, we brought our best to be neutral, fair, thorough, and impartial to our work. We looked at, in this case, not only the law, both federal and state, but also your board policies, administrative regulations. With that in mind, I turn to Leslie for just a bit about the scope of the engagement.
Thank you and good afternoon. As we turn to thinking about scope, I just wanted to complete the little piece about background. Gina and I have a practice that it's entirely devoted to the institutional response and to improving institutional responses. The practice group is based out of Philadelphia, but it's a national practice that works with colleges, universities, and K-12 schools. Notably, we do not, within our practice group, engage in any civil litigation on behalf of schools or against schools. So we have a very intentional choice to live in the space of subject matter expertise, and we hope to bring that to bear. The scope in this matter is one that was crafted and directed at the request of the board, and that was to look at the institutional response at Palo Alto High School into a specific report by a student in the fall of 2016. I recognize the frustration for audience members in wanting to know all of the details, and as we'll share with you, we did present a very detailed chronology to the board that included identified information, but because of the extreme privacy of student interest in these issues, and as Gina referenced, the federal laws that protect that privacy, the way that this information is presented to you will be through our findings, and to the extent that we have to share a fact along the way to explain the finding, we hope to be able to give you sufficient information that you can understand those. If we think about the scope, the specific question we were asked was, how was it handled? What did the school and the district do in response? And the actions that the school and the district took in response, were they in accordance with applicable federal law, state law, and board policy? Gina framed for you very broadly the pieces that we looked at, the federal laws, and we'll go into a little detail about them in just a moment. The main federal law here is Title IX, although FERPA is also a piece that applies. The state law comes from multiple sources. A large piece of that is the Education Code. We also, however, have the what you call in California CANRA, which is the Child Abuse and Neglect Reporting Act. The other state laws that we consider are the California Code of Regulations, which sets forth a uniform complaint procedures, as well as some aspects of your penal code and your health and welfare code that speak to the inspection of juvenile court records. It's a very broad, about a binder this size, in fact, of law and policy that have to be synthesized to understand the things that apply, and we'll share with you the relevant pieces here. If you've had the opportunity to look at the report, you'll see there's a small section in the law near the beginning, and then a, I think, 42-page appendix that goes into much greater detail for those of you who are aspiring law students or have more interest in seeing the nuts and bolts of those.
So in addition to the synthesis of all of the laws that apply, we also looked at what I like to boil down to the paperwork and the people work. We conducted interviews of individuals who were involved in the institutional response or should have been involved in the institutional response, as well as looking at all the available documents. And in this case, documents came from many sources, from emails to text messages to personal notes. And we gathered as many as we could through as many sources as we could and as many platforms as we could. That integration, which is outlined in more detail in the report, was put together to give us insight into the institutional response. And please note, as your board chair already said, this was not to identify what happened below or what happened with the underlying facts between the individual students that were involved in this case. This was also not to make personnel decisions, because that is not our role. Our role is to find the facts, call it as we see it, and say no more. And that was our approach, and that's how we took the information in preparing that approach. A little bit about the regulatory framework starts with the law of Title IX.
So Title IX, if you're familiar, and if you have a copy of the report with you, it's on page 5. Title IX is a federal civil rights law that essentially says that we cannot discriminate on the basis of sex in an educational institution that receives federal funding. It applies to colleges, universities, and K-12 schools. Under Title IX, there are some very high-level requirements. We have to have one person who's in charge of coordinating the institution's compliance with the federal law. We have to have a notice of non-discrimination that we promulgate and give notice to across our community, to all of our community members, students, parents, employees, and third parties. We also have to have prompt and equitable grievance procedures. And what that means is if the school is on notice of an incident or a report or a suspicion of sexual or gender-based harassment or violence, the school must take immediate steps to investigate or otherwise determine what happened. And in doing so, the school has to put interim measures in place to support the complainant, and that's the word that we use for the individual who has brought forth a concern or may have experienced sexual or gender-based harassment or violence, to support their continued access to educational opportunities. As we're evaluating how to respond, Title IX does allow for both informal responses and formal investigative responses. If we're in a formal investigative response, as I said, it must be prompt and equitable. The current rubric is about 60 days, and equitable means both parties have equal rights in the process, both the complainant and the student who or employee who is accused. Title IX applies to students, employees, and third parties as long as it's connected in some way to the school's education program or activities. What the school is required to do if it finds sexual harassment and or any of the forms of behavior that constitute forms of sexual harassment, such as sexual violence, is to take, and the finding is by a preponderance of evidence, is to take action to eliminate the harassment, prevent its reoccurrence, and address any effects both on the individual and the community. And that's very high level Title IX. There's much more detail. Your education code adopts many of those same and is parallel in the provisions, and then your education code is been adopted at board policy and administrative regulation level so that you can actually track through to see where the pieces start at the broad umbrella of Title IX, are embedded in state law, and then at the board policy and administrative regulation level continue through. And just one last sort of summary on the places in which each of those 3 levels of authority intersect. There's an outline in the report on pages 4 and 5. Some of those pieces I've already shared with you: the notice of non-discrimination, the centralized oversight. We have to have written policies that talk about how we will receive a report, what we'll do with the report, what the investigation looks like. There have to be clear protocols for what reporting looks like within an educational institution, and typically that means all employees who have authority or the duty to report the ability to redress harassment in these issues must get it central to your Title IX coordinator. And then you have the overlay in a K-12 school of your Child Protective Services obligations under CANRA to report externally as well to your Child Protective Services. You have to, under Title IX, the Education Code, and your local board policies, give information to the student involved or the employee involved, the complainant or the respondent, about what the policy says, what your rights are to pursue an investigation under the Uniform Complaint Procedures, and then, as we talked about, follow those procedures and ultimately give written notice of the outcome to both parties. So this is what happened, this is what we decided, this is what we found, has to go to the parties. All of that has to be documented and maintained within the district, and ultimately the last piece of Title IX that's significant speaks to education, prevention, training for all students, all employees, and then other things around cultural climate awareness and paying attention to those issues.
What Leslie has just outlined for you is what your district is responsible for doing, taking that federal law, that state law, and through board policy and your administrative regulations, put it into practice. Some context as we move into our findings and the systemic observations. First, the Palo Alto High School was under investigation by OCR, and it resolved with an agreement in March of 2017. So for more context in the broader view of Title IX and its operation at the Palo Alto High School, look to that resolution agreement, and that is online. In addition to that resolution agreement, however, Leslie just outlined many of the provisions of your administrative regulations and your board policy. And from the perspective of systemic observations, I want to share first that your non-discrimination and harassment policy, AR 5145, and I won't quote them all, but these are some significant ones, requires that you designate, as Leslie said, an employee who's responsible for coordinating the efforts to comply. In this case, at the time of this event, the person who was designated as the person to comply was Holly Wade. In the district's UCP, AR 1312.3, again, I'll try not to quote all of the specific numbers of the codes as I move on. The compliance officer who's designated, that was Holly Wade, shall receive, and in the law, when we read the word shall, that means a must, shall receive and investigate complaints and shall ensure district compliance. In addition, our UCP notes that the superintendent, in this case, Max McGee at the time, or designee, shall ensure that that compliance officer and anyone else who is designated to do this work shall receive training and are knowledgeable about the laws and programs for which they're responsible. In light of these provisions and the facts in our review, we found that both the superintendent and the Title IX coordinator failed to exercise sufficient oversight of those compliance responsibilities. This lack of oversight was particularly concerning in our view at the time, October of 2016, when we had been under OCR investigation for our response to Title IX issues in the Palo Alto High School.
Say we, you mean the district and the
The
Palo Alto High
district,
School.
thank you, Leslie. At the time when the district was squarely in focus of our federal regulator and under investigation. So this case came in years into that review. In addition to Title IX and the Ed Code and our board policies, we must also, according to the AR and board policies, document. It requires documentation to demonstrate our compliance. We must maintain documentation of complaints and resolutions, and we must maintain records of all UCP complaints. We found in this matter significant concerns in the nature of the documentation. In this case, as I've said, the Title IX coordinator did not exercise sufficient supervision and oversight. A lot of this was left to the site level in this particular case. And I want to pause and step out of the list of findings and say these findings are limited to a particular case, and where we could zoom out to make a systemic finding, we did. But we were careful to ensure that when we made systemic findings, we tied them to facts, interviews, and documents. In this case, the district did not coordinate and integrate the application of federal law and state law and board policy in the AR. In fact, we were in a practice, at least as this case demonstrated, of not offering a UCP and responding at the site level. With the exception of the board policies and administrative regulations, the district did not maintain formally written or developed protocols, so that when a case came in and we needed to coordinate different individuals to respond consistent with our board policies and administrative regulations, we did not have those protocols that would have helped. And when I say us, the district maintained insufficient documentation and insufficient centralized record keeping. As a consequence, that prevented the Title IX coordinator from effectively tracking patterns, tracking trends, and making informed decisions because we weren't getting information central to the person who is designated by our AR and our board policy consistent with the Ed Code and federal law to oversee this. So if we didn't have good input that was going to a centralized place, we weren't getting good output with good results or good judgments because we didn't have all the information, nor were we coordinating all of our responsibilities. What we saw in this case in particular was that school administrators maintained inconsistent formal documentation. We also saw no efforts to maintain centralization. We also saw personal notes, notes in personal timelines, in other records, cell phone, text messages, informal, and often they weren't contemporaneous notes or maintained as official school records. And again, I'm speaking of this one case. The personal notes and timelines and other records were also not shared with others in real time, and in some cases, not at all. Based on the training and practice, it was a common practice that was communicated to us, and this was a systemic concern. It was a common practice to not document formally, but to communicate by telephone or text message to avoid creating documentation that could potentially be publicly released. And so there were some practices that undercut good sharing of information and centralization of information. The Title IX coordinator was to be maintaining documentation of all reports. The Title IX coordinator was to be offering a UCP to students and their parents or guardians for any reported sex or gender-based and other form of discrimination and harassment. The district also provided training for district and school employees over the course recently of the summer, and there has been additional training and additional significant improvements and efforts since we have been in place.
We also noted and documented training in advance of this incident so that there was training done both at the district level and the site level about the UCP, a document that had been in existence in its current form since 2014 and had been in existence well before that as well. Turning now to the specifics of this particular incident, I'd like to start with the framing of it's very difficult in a written report to capture all of the nuances of the judgment calls that your employees and administrators are making in real time as things are happening. And we try very hard to understand the perspective and the context of each individual that we speak with, recognizing that Palo Alto High School has, I think, between 1,900 and 2,000 students, so a very large student body, a very busy set of administrators. As we think about the initial response, one of the things that we saw very clearly was concern for the welfare of students and immediate responsiveness to the students by the individuals who were there on the ground. And what you'll see through the first couple of pages on 20 and 21 are really almost textbook responses to what we would expect a school to do in response to information that comes to light. So in this case, on a Friday afternoon, a student shared a concern with her instructional staff member. That instructional staff member was Claire Gleason, and the title is, I think Miss Gleason's title is, correct me for one moment, Avid Instructional Aide. With the student's permission, Ms. Gleason immediately took the student to the Wellness Center, and in the Wellness Center spoke with Jonathan Fercheri. Jonathan Fercheri is licensed under state law, has the ability to maintain confidentiality under state law, given the mental health provision services that are there. Jonathan Fercheri spoke with the student, and again, had the student's permission to share information with the school. However, Mr. Fercheri also determined, based on the information that had been shared with him by the student, that there was something that triggered his obligation to report under CANRA, a suspicion of possible child abuse that needed to be reported. And so that reporting process began on that afternoon. It happened in a very timely manner, and I will share one of the things that's outlined earlier is that the Wellness Center documentation is actually quite thorough, and in particular the documentation by Mr. Fercheri that lists times all through that afternoon of who was notified when and at what time from about 2 p.m. that afternoon up until as late as 8 o'clock that evening. So what we know is that immediately after the information was brought to Mr. Fercheri's attention, that was brought, and you'll see in that first bullet that instructional staff member Claire Gleason, referred to as counselor, is actually the coordinator of the Wellness Center. Because the reporter in a child abuse mandated report to your Child Protective Services is confidential by law, this was written in such a way to protect that confidentiality. We received permission to share that that was in fact the individual who made that report. They brought the report to the attention of the school resource officer, that would be Ben Lee, and to assistant principal 1, and that's Vicki Kim. That information Vicky Kim then immediately informed Kim Diorio, the principal, of the possible sexual assault that occurred on campus. That happened within a very short time span and before the end of the academic day. The principal and 2 assistant principals, when you see assistant principal 1 throughout, that's Vicky Kim, and assistant principal 2 is Jerry Berkson. It was our understanding through interviews that typically discipline issues were handled by Jerry Berkson and Adam Paulson, but because of the gender of the student in this case, the decision was made that it might be more comfortable with a student to have a female assistant principal work with and speak with her. The principal, Kim Diorio, promptly informed the superintendent. So there are text message and telephone record documentations that show that that report was made, attempted to be made that same day, and then by the following day that connection had happened, and the superintendent was informed of this potential Title IX report on campus. The superintendent, within days, identified the need to consider whether a complaint under the Uniform Complaint Procedure, an investigation on the Uniform Complaint Procedure at the board policy level should be initiated, and raised that question in an email with the Title IX coordinator. Wanted to make sure that you were in the loop on this, that a uniform complaint procedure may be necessary based on the complaint as I understand it. And the superintendent also informed the board in writing in an email that this report had come in. There was a student disciplinary issue at the high school that was being investigated, and then it may result in a sexual harassment complaint through the UCP. So all of those pieces happened very quickly, happened in the order that they should have, reported internally within the site, and then reported internally above that to the district level, to the Title IX coordinator, and to the superintendent. And as I shared earlier, we had 2 external reports as well. And so when Ben Lee, the school resource officer, was brought in and spoke with the student, at that point the Palo Alto Police Department detective was called in and came to the school, as well as Jonathan Fracheri later that evening made the oral and then filled out a written report to the Santa Clara Child Protective Services Department. And those 2 pieces were shared externally.
Moving to centralized oversight and determination of the appropriate response, in the very early hours, the Title IX coordinator, while involved in discussions around this, did not exercise oversight, but deferred the oversight and the review to on-site administrators as the appropriate institutional response. That was inconsistent with what your board policy says and inconsistent with what your UCP says. Under your board policy and your AR, with respect to the UCP, at the beginning of an investigation, the district's compliance officer is required to describe the complaint procedure to the complainant and their parent and guardian, discuss what actions are being sought in response to the complaint, and review records, notes, or statements related to the complaint. While the Title IX coordinator, as I said, did engage in some conversation and discussion with the school and district personnel, she, and this is Holly Wade in this case, did not create a file. She did not properly evaluate the institution's Title IX responsibilities, as Leslie outlined earlier. When we knew or should have known, we have to take steps to investigate or otherwise determine what happened. The Title IX coordinator did not do that in this case. She did not communicate directly with the complainant, the respondent, or parents to provide procedural options under the UCP, including the availability of the UCP and, importantly, a requirement of Title IX articulating a prohibition against any retaliation in response to a report under Title IX. The Title IX coordinator also did not seek to identify any pattern information, if available, did not evaluate the appropriateness of the interim measures, or evaluate whether the UCP investigation should even be initiated absent the requests of the complainant. In this matter, from a centralization oversight standpoint, we also find that the principal at Palo Alto High School, Kim Diorio, did not inform the complainant as required under the UCP about her right to file a written complaint as required in your administrative regulation, which describes the UCP, also your administrative regulation that describes your non-discrimination and harassment provisions. So to some, neither Kim Diorio nor Holly Wade offered that to the students in this matter.
The way that your policies are written, the board policy level, is very clear that the district compliance officer, that's another word for Title IX coordinator in the policy, shall initiate an impartial investigation. And so the authority and the burden of initiating the UCP investigation sits at the district level and sits with your Title IX coordinator. Your Title IX coordinator, as Gina framed, not only has to talk through this is what the UCP involves, but is required to provide the complainant with an opportunity to describe the incident, to identify witnesses, and to provide other evidence, to interview individuals who have relevant information, including the respondent and other witnesses, and to review records, notes, and statements, and ultimately prepare a written report. At the conclusion of that written report, to do a written notice of the outcome, our determination. This is what we found, and to share that with the parties. Title IX has those same requirements. It calls for an adequate, reliable, and impartial investigation. What we found is that on the ground, the site level, and largely under the leadership of Vicki Kim, did a initial inquiry and investigation to understand what occurred in order to make immediate decisions about what to do, and vis-a-vis protecting the safety of the students. How do we move forward? This was again a Friday afternoon. What happens next week as we move through those places? One clarification that I'd like to offer, and you'll note that the report was posted in draft format. We often find that questions that we expect to answer today may help clarify things or may identify for us places that we need to provide additional clarification. The first bullet on page 22 says, Assistant Principal 1, Vicki Kim, took appropriate initial steps to triage and identify the nature of the concern raised by the complainant, but did not conduct a thorough, informed, or reliable investigation as related by Title IX. I want to clarify that it was not Vicki Kim's responsibility to conduct that investigation. It was the compliance officer and the district's responsibility, as I just framed under the UCP. So that clarification will be made in the report as it's finalized. What we did note, though, were that the interviews and the questions of the students in this case were not what we would term as trauma-informed or effective interview practices. They were very brief interviews that were done, and they were interviews that were done in the presence of the law enforcement officer, the detective from Palo Alto who was here. That while they were present for those interviews, you have a particular board policy that requires there to be certain documentation when there's a law enforcement interview. That was not done. We also noted that there were significant issues in this case that had to do with consent, welcomeness, the age of the parties, whether or not the conduct itself had other impact on the educational environment, which is broader than did the incident occur. And in this case, as the school was moving through, and this is at the site level, the follow-up steps in understanding what occurred, there was an over-reliance on the concurrent law enforcement investigation. What you'll see in the legal discussion is that the law enforcement requirements are different than the school's requirements under Title IX and the UCP. Law enforcement is asking, did a crime happen? At the UCP level, we're asking, did something happen that would constitute sexual harassment, and did that incident or what occurred impact the complainant's educational environment or the educational environment for other students, and takes us to the level of a hostile environment. So it's a different inquiry that we're looking at. So you could have something that violates state law and doesn't violate Title IX, or violates Title IX and doesn't violate state law, and we cannot rely or substitute our judgment by relying on law enforcement's judgment. As we move through, and I'm not going to go through all of the detailed pieces of this investigation because I'm conscious of time and we want to make sure to leave plenty of time for comment and questions from the board, some of the things that stand out are that there was a follow-up interview that was done of the complainant by telephone in the presence of the complainant's parent, and that's particularly, I think, for an adolescent population, it's very difficult to interview on sensitive issues with the parent present if we're seeking to get kind of a full and unhindered account of what occurred.
And over the phone.
Again.
And over the phone.
And by telephone. As many school districts do, I will share with this, that there was a request that the students write their own statements as an investigative practice. That's not the most effective way to gather information. The student doesn't necessarily know what to prioritize, elevate, what's important to consider. And if you're leading an interview as an investigator, there are a great number of topics that we might ask about that a student might not know to consider, whether it be a complainant, a respondent, or a witness. There were written summaries gathered from individuals like Jonathan Fercheri and Claire Gleason, but again, they were not interviewed as part of the investigative process. there was a reference to text messages and other information that was not gathered as part of this initial determination as to what happened. And there was no investigation report that was created. The notes that were taken were not contemporaneous. It was as if we sat in a lecture hall and listened to a teacher, and then when we got back home, wrote down what we remembered the teacher said, which in an investigation, what's said is critically important in terms of the accuracy and as verbatim as we can receive. There was also no indication that the school evaluated or assessed for for pattern. So was there other behavior by the respondent that may have been relevant? And ultimately, as I mentioned earlier, the current state of the guidance by Title IX says that schools should use a preponderance of the evidence standard. Whether or not that changes in coming days remains to be seen, but at the time of this investigation, there should have been a determination by a preponderance as to the facts of the underlying incident. Did it happen or not by a preponderance of the evidence, which means more likely than not. And that wasn't done in this case. There was disciplinary action taken, but for a related issue, not an ultimate determination on what happened in this issue. Ultimately, there were a significant number of things that should have been explored through this process that were not. One of the things that I will share is that it's difficult in the chronological way to kind of tease out a particular individual's actions, and we chose to present it to you in what we thought was the clearest way chronologically. I wanted to observe one piece that you'll hear this theme through as Gina and I participate and to continue. Your assistant principal, Vicki Kim, did raise the issue of the UCP 3 separate times in this process. And so very early on, that there was a discussion with the Title IX coordinator within days of the incident as to whether UCP should be pursued. And this was framed on page 21. The Title IX coordinator did consult with outside counsel and was advised that because this act was deemed to be welcome as opposed to unwelcome, that we did not need to pursue a Title IX investigation. And that was the advice that was relayed back to Vicki Kim. Secondly, about just short of 2 months later, Vicki Kim was at a training with that same outside counsel and asked the question directly, should we have offered a UCP at the time in this case? And was advised by that same attorney, no, one was not necessary. And then as Gina will frame, I think, or maybe I will, one of the two of us in just a moment, when new information came to light about some difficulties that the complainant was having at school, again, Vicki Kim contacted the Title IX coordinator and said, should we be calling the complainant's parent and offering a UCP in this case? And so I'm not sure how clearly that came through as I was reading this, but when we came back to prepare for this again and wanting to be clear about the roles of individuals, wanted to share that piece with you.
One of the reasons many policies, and in your district, you have a board policy and an AR that requires education and training of those who are charged with doing these investigations, is for the very reason that Leslie outlined, so that those things that could and should be done in investigating, in questioning, in gathering information, in making decisions about discrimination, harassment, are done by individuals who are trained. So represented in that chronology that Leslie just gave you was that task being put on Vicki Kim at the site level, where she was continually asking, should this be a UCP? Because if it went to a UCP, there would be a different kind of investigation in the hands of that person who oversaw the UCP.
So I think that brings us to the concept of interim measures.
So with respect to interim measures, Leslie has already outlined this, and in the interest of time, the interim measures in this case were done well, consistent with the requirements of Title IX at the outset. Consistent with the requirements of Title IX, the Ed Code, and the UCP, we do find that the school provided reasonably available and appropriate interim measures that were designed in this case to facilitate the complainant's continued access to her educational opportunities. There were remedial measures for the complainant, which included accommodations, schedule accommodations, support that she needed, and took some action to enforce those provisions, as well as enforcing the provisions of a temporary restraining order that was provided to the school in this matter. The school also provided additional protective measures where the respondent in this case was separated from the complainant and prohibited the respondent from communicating with the complainant. Those prohibitions were put in place even before the temporary restraining order. So the interim measures that should have and could have been put in place were put in place very early on under the oversight of Vicki Kim.
So that turns us then to about 3 to 4 weeks after the incident that the complainant came back to the school. And at this point, she spoke with Assistant Principal 3, as identified in the report. That was Kathy Lawrence at the time, and shared with Kathy Lawrence some concerns about other students who were, for lack of a better word, harassing conduct or perhaps spreading rumors or talking about the incident. And the complainant shared the impact on the complainant of other students talking about this and how that was impacting. What we found was that Kathy Lawrence took immediately responsive action, that took the time to understand the complainant's concerns, that spoke with the other students whose conduct had been in question, but despite being aware of the prior incident and the prior report, did not coordinate the information back with Vicky Kim or Kim Diorio to say, hey, this new thing has happened. Could this be harassment or retaliation or intimidation? Is there something about this that might now create a hostile environment for this student? Remember, hostile environment is the idea that the underlying incident or some subsequent behavior is so severe, persistent, or pervasive that it impacts or interferes with the complainant's ability to utilize and have access to the educational opportunities. And so at that point, again, we saw what we saw at the first date of the report was immediate responsiveness, tend to the issue at hand, address the concerns, do some investigative steps to triage and understand what happened, but a failure to tie it to the broader Title IX obligations of what does this mean vis-a-vis our obligation, if you remember, to eliminate, prevent, and address the effects of a hostile environment, if one existed. And we make no finding as to whether one did or did not exist, but we needed to be, and Gina and I both do this, the district needed to be asking the right questions at that time. At that time, Kathy Lawrence did not connect the complainant to the Title IX coordinator, did not offer the UCP. And again, the conduct that was described is such that could be the subject of a UCP at that time. Approximately a week later, the assistant principal tells us that she did follow up with the complainant. And at that point, the complainant said, I'm fine, everything is okay. But that was not documented contemporaneously, nor was it shared back, as we said, with Vicky Kim or with Kim Diorio.
So one thing that I wanted to share was that there were sanctions issued in this matter, and the sanctions that were issued in this matter were related to conduct unrelated to the original report. There was never a final review of the original report with a documented investigative process with a decision-making process that looked at the facts and determined whether or not sexual harassment occurred in this matter. But picking up where Leslie left off, after the subsequent report of harassment by the complainant, the school learned, in particular, Assistant Principal 1, Vicky Kim, and Assistant Principal 3, Kathy Lawrence, learned that the complainant was considering leaving the district because of the impact of the incident that was shared at the outset, as well as the subsequent rumors. Assistant Principal 1 communicated the circumstances of that potential departure to the Title IX coordinator. Appropriately so, raising it up. It is still in the context of potential sexual harassment. Vicky Kim got it there, as Leslie outlined earlier, and inquired again of the Title IX coordinator whether the school should offer a UCP. And we didn't point this out at the outset, and in fairness to Max, very early on, Max also said this may require a UCP. So it wasn't lost on your superintendent very early on. It was asked. It didn't go in that direction, but it was asked by Max. At that point in time, when Vicky Kim asked again, and this was the third time that she asked about a UCP, she was told by the Title IX coordinator that she should not offer a UCP. Assistant Principal 3, who was copied on this communication that the complainant was leaving, and that is Kathy Lawrence, didn't use that opportunity to share the information that she had about the complaints of harassment and rumors that she resolved and responded to, according to her notes in the interview. Those earlier concerns that the complainant raised may have provided a fuller context in which to evaluate the district's responsibilities again to offer UCP in the context of potential. And again, we don't know, because we didn't do an investigation, potential retaliation that was being described by the complainant as related to an underlying accusation at the outset. The statements by the complainant's parent that was shared with the school constituted notice to the school of a potential hostile environment, which required, and this is going back to the very beginning of our presentation, when we knew or should have known, we need to take steps to evaluate, investigate, or otherwise determine what happened to determine if this violated Title IX or some provision of our code.
Finally, the last portion of this incident or event that we made findings about concerned additional information that the school received in early February of 2017. So after the complainant had already withdrawn from the school received some information from an external authority directing the school to take certain actions. And the district at that time didn't have a protocol or policy in place to log that correspondence when it came in and to assign that compliance task to cooperating with whatever it was the external authority was requiring. The district did not take the steps to look beyond the face of that document to say, what does this mean? What is this information? And does this information in some way trigger for us an additional fact-finding obligation? So should we have taken steps to determine, did this involve on or off-campus conduct by the respondent? If it was on campus, did it involve one of our PALI students? Was it connected in some way, or could it possibly have continuing effects on our campus? Whether as a result of the conduct that could have been determined had additional questions been asked beyond the face of the document, did the respondent represent a danger to persons, or were there additional information that might have talked about a potential pattern of conduct that could have triggered schools' obligations under your board policies and administrative regulations on suspension, expulsion, and due process. So again, there was a failure at the end to coordinate the information, to ask what it means, and then to take the appropriate investigative steps in response to that.
That concludes our overview of the facts. We have been engaged to look at other cases, not as deeply as this case, but in the context of the OCR resolution agreement. And once that level overview, that high level overview of those cases is completed, we will be offering recommendations that take into account this deep dive, as well as the cases that were identified in Section E of the resolution agreement. And with that, we turn to the board for next steps.
Yes, thank you, Ms. Smith and Ms. Gomez. We are going to take public comment. If you want to comment, please fill out a card. You can always change your mind and turn me down when I call your name. But we'd like to get the cards together so we know how many we have. Okay, 23. Okay, we have 23 cards. Some of you may know that we revisited our board bylaw 9323 earlier this month to put more structure around the number of minutes per number of cards. And in our new version of that board bylaw 9323, 23 cards means a minute apiece, so that we can get in as many speakers as possible. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to call your names in sets of 3, so that you can kind of make your way towards the lectern, particularly when it's crowded. It's hard to kind of make your way over there. Then when you speak, as soon as you announce your name, Mr. Dauber will start the timer for a minute. And so then the timer will go off after a minute, and we'll have the next person. So we're not allowed to answer questions in this time. Ms. Smith and Ms. Gomez won't be answering any questions. This is your chance to comment to us for things you want us to take under consideration as we move forward. So, and we take students first, just so you know. So, Noga Hurwitz, Seal Tracton, Kathy Jordan. Just do students. Yeah. Okay. Yes, and pull the mic down close to your mouth because it's, yes.
Yeah.
Thank you.
My name is Noga Hurwitz. I'm a senior at PALI, and I wanted to provide some student insight to the holistic culture Mysterio has cultivated at PALI, because I'm sure you'll hear a lot of adult perspectives tonight. Last year, I spoke to many of you as I was writing the OCR story for Verde magazine, and in that intense dive into the OCR case, I also learned a lot about Ms. Diorio's leadership on campus, and my findings were astounding. Since her tenure, the tradition of streaking has virtually been eliminated. The destigmatization of mental illness has been on the forefront of our academic journeys, and students are more aware and responsive towards administrative decisions thanks to Ms. Diorio's commitment to transparency with the student press. Through my capacity as serving as seniors class president, this has only been reaffirmed. While this isn't an insight to the specific findings of this case, I wanted to provide you with some of my feelings about Ms. Diorio. Last week, we celebrated Trusted Adults Day on campus. Ms. Diorio is one of my trusted adults because she makes me feel safe, heard, and empowered to be my best self, which is, I think, the best thing that you could hope for your kids at school.
Thank you, Ms. Hurwitz.
Thank you.
Seal Tracton, Kathy Jordan, Margot Wixom.
Do I just say my name, guys? Okay, my name is Seal Tracton, and I'm a junior at Pally. During my freshman year at Pally, I went through a hard time, and because of my former experience in middle school, I didn't expect any help, especially like from trusted adults. But I was surprised when Ms. Diorio actually helped me and made me feel safe again at Pally. And continuing on, she kept checking up on me and made sure that I felt safe and supported at school. And additionally, I'd like to add that Elizabeth from the Wellness Center and I came up with like a slogan sort of, which is, the Pally world would be dim without Kim. Thank you.
Thank you. Catherine Jordan, Margot Wixom, Carolyn Benfield.
According to the Cozen report, the district did not take steps to assess or understand the import of the information provided to the school by an external authority, which was the January 31 notification letter of the felony conviction by the October 11, 2016 perpetrator. The district did not properly investigate to determine whether the additional information presented a potential pattern of conduct that may warrant further action or triggered obligations under expulsion. By ignoring this information, these administrators did not seek to keep our student body safe. And as for the October 11, 2016 victim, the report states that no appropriate punishment for the incident was meted out. These few administrators cannot remain in a position of trust over our children.
Thank you, Ms. Jordan. Margot Wixom, Carolyn Benfield, Jennifer Gardner.
So I've sent a copy of this letter to you via email to all the board members, and I'll overview because of the minute. Certainly, we're all concerned with Title IX incidents as staff. I am very appreciative of the efforts of the district and of Principal Diorio to have trainings that we've had, 5 actually since May, which have been very helpful to clarify many things. I've been teaching for 27 years, and many of the things that I've had trainings in other districts have been clarified. It's certainly distressful to me that many of the things in the news has been overlooked, and I really appreciate the attorneys who addressed these things that were, like the timeline, which much clearer about how well things were addressed. What is most troublesome about the current dialogue is the level of toxicity and abuse that is being perpetrated in this community through anonymous postings and seemingly encouragement to applaud this behavior by adults in our community. It's certainly stressful for me personally to watch leadership devolve into this kind of abuse and harassment. I ask the board to uphold the standards of this.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Carolyn Benfield, Jennifer Gardner, Michael Nahar.
Hi, I'm Carolyn Benfield, and I'm just a real quick comment. I wanted to just point out that none of the administrators in the district received Title IX training until May of 2017. Of course, and this incident took place quite a bit before that. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Benfield. Jennifer Gardner, Michael Nahar, Peter Diepenbrock.
So I'm Jenny Gardner, and I have a parent of 3 kids who've gone through the school district, and I've worked in the district for 16 years, 3 of being at Pally in the main office. During the time I've worked in the district, I've worked with 7 principals directly, not to mention the others when my kids were in school. And that said, I can't say enough about Kim Diorio. The highest praise I can give her is that the way she cares about the kids, the way she interacts with people, in the office, on campus, making sure administrators are out and about, visible and accessible, and a lot gets done. This hasn't happened with people I've worked for in the past. It really stands out. I'm struggling deeply with what I feel are unfair attacks on her because I know her and her work ethic from my perspective. We can always learn more. We need time to learn and grow. Kim is a great leader. She's the best administrator I have worked with. In closing, the first assessment I made of her the first year still stands for me. I enjoy working at a school site where there is clear leadership, direction, and follow-through. Kim is the epitome of an excellent principal.
Thank you, Ms. Gardner. Michael Nahar, Peter Diepenbrock, Chris Eggert.
Hello. Please read my comments that I sent to you earlier this afternoon. I feel sad and angry for the students and families who are victimized by assault. It is clear that the absence of detailed training by PAUSD's Title IX coordinator to Palo Alto's current administration surely led to a lack of offering a full range of procedural options. In absence of that specific training, I'm glad that we had administrators who acted quickly with the best intentions while navigating the very tricky waters of Title IX, FERPA, law enforcement, victims' rights, the rights of the accused, and their own moral imperative and media scrutiny. We have a consistent, true, caring, and yes, loving voice on our campus at Pali. This voice has been a friend to many colleagues and community members, but also a tough, keen decision maker on practical matters and in times of crisis. That voice belongs to Kim DiOrio, and I know something about voices. She is a model of leadership, restraint, class, and courage. Please make note of that.
Thank you, Mr. Nahar. Peter Diepenbrock, Chris Eggert, Jacqueline Edwards.
Yeah, I'm Peter Diepenbrock. I've been a teacher for 21 years at Palo Alto High School, so Kim is my 8th principal during that time. And in my opinion, she is right on par with Marilyn Cook and Sandra Pearson as far as the best principals that I've had. There's a lot of information out there. I just like to stick to the facts of the situation. And for me, the most important ones are that the day that this incident was reported, Mrs. DiOrio reported it to her superior. That's a very important fact to me. Previous speaker used the word victim. Police investigation is confidential, so I think victim is an inaccurate word to use in this situation.
Thank you. Chris Eggert, Jacqueline Edwards, Jack Bungarden.
Yeah, hi. Chris Eggert, social studies teacher, Palo Alto High School. In my own estimation, Palo Alto High School is a better place to be a teacher at since Kim DiOrio became principal. It's also a better place to be a student at. As the first speaker mentioned right off the bat, there was a streaking problem that had grown in ascendancy over the years, and Kim dealt with that, took it very seriously and dealt with it very effectively right off the bat. Since then, we've had a lot of support from admin through professional development, and there has been a very, very positive change in the culture of our school. I've also seen Kim and Vicki and Jerry and Adam and Kathy demonstrate over the years that I've watched them that they really care about kids. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Eggert. Jacqueline Edwards, Jack Bungarden, Melinda Mattis.
Hi, my name is Jacqueline Edwards, and as a history teacher, I always tell my students that their voices count, and that if they truly want to advocate something, I never waste an opportunity to be an upstander rather than a bystander. Many have said that my voice would be wasted on deaf ears for those whose minds have already been made up, and that I should not ever subject myself to inappropriate and unsafe conditions others have felt when attending board meetings. I am standing here asking you to look in the eyes of that student right over there and to assure him that my voice is not going to be wasted, as well as the voices of others, that you will commit to the safety and the environment of all learners, teachers, and administrators. I ask, is it true that the only time the Pali admin was trained on Title IX procedures was after the investigation occurred? And if so, what responsibility does the district have in becoming more proactive than reactive? I have been teaching in this district for 19 years and serve under 7 different principals. I support Kim DiOrio and the admin team for the good work that they do.
Thank you, Ms. Edwards. Jack Bungarden, Melinda Mattis, Matt Hall.
Afternoon. I'm a 17-year teacher at Pali. That means Kim has been either our assistant principal or principal the majority of my years. Over that time, in many discussions with Kim over issues complex or simple in times when we agreed and a lot of times when we didn't agree. What strikes me about Kim and what's been true about Kim is that she has always acted in good faith, and always the primary criterion for any decision was what's best for kids, and that shows up repeatedly. That very much reflects in the culture that's somewhat reflected in the comments you've heard so far. And although I can't speak for everybody, what I can say is our culture is dramatically better than what we had only just a few years ago. And that for the most part, although I can't speak for every member of the staff, most of the staff members I know, and I know a good number of them, we're pretty happy, maybe very happy under Kim's leadership. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bungarden. Melinda Mattis, Matt Hall, Josh Bloom.
Hi, I'm Melinda Mattis. I've worked in the district since 1999. The last 14 years have been at Pally. In my tenure, no principal has made a more proactive effort to address the culture at Pally than Kim DiOrio. She inherited a school culture that promoted streaking and that made me want to shutter myself in the classroom for fear of encountering naked adolescents on the quad. She addressed the issue head-on by meeting with students in small groups where she was authentic, honest, and firm. The first time she did it, students didn't know what to make of such an honest, unfamiliar approach. She has since created a culture where students are comfortable coming forward with complaints and concerns. The admin team she has built and the wellness center that she engendered are approachable and available to students and staff. She has maintained a vision of growth and progress for Pally. Her focus has not been on maintenance and status quo. Instead, she has pushed Pally community to be better. It has been a pleasure to watch her grow as a professional who genuinely cares about improving her own practice and leadership, including her interest in being better trained in light of this event. I support Kim DiOrio and the entire admin team at Palo Alto High School. Thank you.
Ms. Mattis. Matt Hall, Josh Bloom, Shirley Tokheim.
My name is Matt Hall. I tell my ASB students that when speaking publicly, stick to what you know. What I know is that in the 7 years I've been at Pally, Spirit Week used to be a time when the students would be chanting about individual students' sexual and legal peccadillos during a lunchtime rally. Spirit Week was a time when floats were deliberately sabotaged by each class against the other. And what I know is that last year, my senior class last year sat there and helped for more than a day, helped the freshmen build their float. I watched cheers that are positive, dynamic, and fun. That change didn't happen overnight, and it wasn't done by me. It was done by the students, and it was done by Kim DiOrio. Please, I also know that I work with the best team of teachers and administrators in the world. Let us continue on our journey. It's going to make you proud.
Thank you, Mr. Hall. Josh Bloom, Shirley Tokheim, Grant Blackburn.
My name is Josh Bloom. I'm a teacher at Palo Alto High School, and I've been teaching at Palo Alto for over 15 years, both at Gunn and at Pally. Effective principals in Palo Alto respect and empower their staff, inspiring trust, respect, compassion, and the communication of a clear sense of vision and purpose. Kim and our entire administration has always made it clear that they and all of us are here for our students, to empower them, to care for them, and first and foremost, to keep them safe. Effective principals model the character traits they want in their staff and students: to be resilient, to prioritize self-care, to think big, to be committed to growth, to respond compassionately to need, and to be humble. Kim has modeled all of these things. Lastly, an effective principal is committed to long-term growth and lasting change, to shifting a school's culture towards more meaningful success. No one has done that more for a school in my tenure than Kim. I'd like right now just to draw attention to everybody in the room who's here to support Kim DiOrio and our administration. If you could stand up, I'd just like people to know who they are. This is an administration that is loved and respected.
Thank you, Mr.
And to be a
Bloom.
disservice to our school to interrupt our work.
Shirley Tokheim, Grant Blackburn, Kelly Hagan.
I had to do some quick editing. I'm Shirley Tokheim. This is my 7th year as instructional leader of the English department at Pally. So I've been thinking about what I've learned from Kim these past 4 years. To change the culture of an organization, it's not about board policies or WASC reports or district directives. Buy-in. It takes buy-in. How does a leader get that buy-in? Well, ask any successful teacher. Form relationships with the students. Let them know how great you think they are. Have confidence that they can succeed. Kim has earned that buy-in from teachers, students, much of the community. And the English department now has aligned courses, new programs, flexible teaching practices, and a focus on students' mental health. We are a new department. Pally is a new school because of Kim's leadership. And to quote Raymond Carver, to call myself beloved, to feel myself beloved on the earth.
Thank you, Ms.
Kim
Tokheim.
is beloved at Pali, and I am with her.
Thank you, Ms. Tokheim. Grant Blackburn, Kelly Hagan, Esther Wojcicki.
Good evening. My name is Grant Blackburn. I've been a teacher at Palo Alto High School for 17 years. I've gone through a lot of principals, and Kim Diorio, for me, is one of the best. She's done an amazing job in making the climate at Palo Alto High School better, and she's made it a place that I absolutely love to work. I wake up every morning happy and excited that I get to go to work and teach economics and government to my students. And a big reason is because Kim Diorio helped create an environment to help make that happen. I hope very much that we do not respond to the reactionary people who have been flooding the press, and I hope that we do not end up being reactionary in the way that we deal with this situation going forward. I'm sad that our administration did not receive the training they needed before this incident occurred, but I am hopeful that we will do better as we go forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Blackburn. Kelly Hagan, Esther Wojcicki, Lynn Brown.
Hi, thank you. I'm Kelly Hagan. I've been teaching since 1991 for quite a while. I've had probably 10 to 12 principals over that amount of time from various different sites, and Kim Diorio is by far the best principal I've ever worked under. She has brought about such incredible changes to the culture at Pali. We are no longer seeing naked people at lunch. That's a great thing with the streaking being gone. And I'm mostly concerned with what I heard that I heard from your report that they asked over and over if they should be reporting this. So I'm thinking that the training would have been very helpful prior, and I support Kim and her administration very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Hagan. Esther Wojcicki, Lynn Brown, Rebecca Eisenberg.
I'm Esther Wojcicki. I've been teaching in Palo Alto for 34 years. I'm the founder of the Palo Alto High School Media Arts Program. I've served under many principals, and I would like to say that Kim Diorio is one of the best principals I've ever served under. She and Marilyn Cook were the best, well, she is the best. She created a culture of care through actions that support both teachers and students by building effective collaborative teams. She always puts students first. She prioritizes them when they want to see her. I know from the journalism program, kids get in and they are able to see her and talk to her, and they're first. They're prioritized. Pali is an excellent learning environment, kinder and more caring as a result of Kim. She's the first principal to attend Camp Unity twice. Kim has done an excellent job.
Thank you,
and
Ms.
I
Wojcicki.
support her.
Thank you. Lynn Brown, Rebecca Eisenberg, Samira Guccione.
So my question is, why is it that every time there's a problem, a hiccup, a mistake, a misstep, there's a witch hunt? And I think the reason is you and you. I think this board goes off the rails every time there's a mistake. It's your failure. It's a failure of leadership. You fail to manage. You fail to lead and solve problems in a professional, reasonable way. And then we get this. It's toxic. It's unhealthy. It undermines the stability of our school district, and I'm tired of it, and you need to stop.
Thank you, Ms. Brown. Rebecca Eisenberg, Samira Guccione, John Fitton.
Although today's presentation, and especially this report, sugarcoats the terrible findings in it, referring to a felony conviction as information and referring to rape as an incident, some things are made very clear in this report. Under this superintendent's leadership and direction, the district violated federal, state, and local law numerous times, including when under investigation by the Justice Department. This superintendent failed to supervise his staff, and when he did supervise his staff, he gave illegal directives, including instructing his staff to obstruct the law by failing to put anything in writing. This superintendent continued to violate the law by relying on outside law firms and blaming these outside law firms for the bad advice that they obviously give. And the superintendent continues to hire and promote unqualified people. Then he blames the inevitable disasters that follow on those direct reports, including Holly Wade. These actions are not normal, nor are they acceptable. They are egregious, and they demonstrate such a lack of responsibility, integrity, and competence that he needs to be removed.
Thank you, Ms. Eisenberg. Samira Guccione, John Fitton, Andrea Wolf.
Just walking in today and hearing the prior speeches makes me wonder what kind of reality warp I've walked into today. None of the teachers present today actually addressed the Title IX violations, or I don't even know if they read the Cozen report. The timelines are actually made. In case anyone's interested in receiving it, it's very clear that this was a potentially preventable act that happened on campus under the supervision of these top administrative people who were aware and reported to by the police that this person who was the perpetrator was had done something prior to the event that happened on campus at Pali. This was the church incident that happened prior. It was reported to the police. The police reported to the admin. The admin did nothing. The student, the victim, had reported to the top admin that she was scared.
Thank you, Ms. Guccione.
That this would happen,
John Fitton,
but they let
Andrea
it happen.
Wolf, Steve Sabag.
My name's John Fitton, and I'm the father of a sophomore girl here at Pali and a son who just graduated. These are certainly serious issues, and I can't speak to accountability and what's appropriate in the past. What I can say is I've worked with Max McGee, Kim DiOrio, and Vicki Kim over the past few months, along with a collaborative group of parents of Pali students to work towards solutions and violence prevention. And I've been impressed by their response and their attitude moving forward, their commitment, their professionalism, and most of all, their integrity. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Fitton. Andrea Wolf, Steve Sabag.
Hi. I would like to know why leadership at the district level has such an impossible time following the requirements of Title IX. I've sat in this room for many hours over the past few years listening to the board discuss issues of compliance with Title IX. And yet, here we are again with a report saying that the person in charge of Title IX compliance for the district did not do their job. My observation leads me to believe that failure to actually perform the basic requirements of one's role is common at the district level. I would like to see this change. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Wolf. Steve Sabag.
Hello, I'm Steve Sabag. I'm a Palo Alto teacher, Palo Alto resident, Palo Alto parent, and this issue is very close to me if you know who my daughter is. I first want to tell you how proud I am of all my colleagues. It's deeply moving to me. The second is, I'm an old teacher, almost 30 years now in the field, and Kim DiOrio is one of the few people who makes me want to get better. She's inspiring. She sent me and went to Vancouver, where I want to get better and better and better. She's the only person I know, after all these years, who absolutely acts on the belief in that all kids matter. The second thing is, as a Palo Alto parent, former Pali grad, a daughter who graduated from Pali, and an 8th grader in Palo Alto, I'd be so proud to have my son attend a school where Kim DiOrio is the principal. Thank you.
Thank you. Colleagues, that's all our cards. Let me just say to the community, thank you for, it is hard to get up to the lectern and speak. It is hard to get up to the lectern and speak when there's this many people in the room. I want to thank you for the grace with which you held our speakers. I think it makes it a lot easier for people to come in the future to realize that they're going to come and will be listened to respectfully. So I'm deeply grateful for that. Okay, Dr. McGee, would you like some comments before we do our questions?
Please.
Okay,
Thank
great.
you. And these remarks will be in the Friday message tomorrow as well. So I want to thank the Cozen O'Connor team for the quality and the quantity of their work, as well as making time to present it today. Clearly, we have serious matters to address. Their report, along with a voluminous backup detail, indicates that this specific incident was indicative that our district was not at the level of legal knowledge, awareness, safety, and accountability where it should have been at the time and where it must be now. I make no excuses. And while we took action these past few months, there is still much more to do. We will take more steps in the next days, weeks, and months, and I'm asking everyone and requiring our staff, myself included, to take personal responsibility for doing their part as individuals and as members of stakeholder groups to foster awareness, to assure reporting through the many available channels, to maintain strict compliance with policy and law, to document all related communications, to participate in informational sessions, such as the one the Pali PTA sponsored last year, to engage deeply and responsively in mandated training for staff and students, and to assure that all understand the legal definitions and critical concepts of uncomfortable, unwelcome, affirmative consent, mandated reporting, and UCP, and that we focus on strengthening related aspects of our climate and culture, including safety, wellness, and respect. Over the course of the last few months, we have made some important improvements to our system, and there are more to come. We've made it easy to file an anonymous complaint with a direct link on our website. We've created a tracking system for administrators to log all UCP and Title IX complaints and required that they do so within 24 hours of hearing anything. The system assures that we will follow through in a timely manner. We have held required training sessions from an expert attorney dating back to May 24th. Administrators have had between 8 and 12 hours of training on Title IX. We have provided a first round of 2-hour sessions to 970 staff members at our high schools, middle schools, and 4 elementary schools. We have contracted with Cozen O'Connor to provide a Title IX Civil Rights Compliance Officer, John DiPaolo, who has been with us since August 1st. Though we had an unsuccessful search the first round, we have reopened our search and broadened it to fill the position of a full-time Title IX Civil Rights Compliance Officer. We are in the process of rewriting our Memorandum of Understanding with the Palo Alto Police Department, ideally to ensure better communication and collaboration regarding investigations. We've hired trained investigators for complex and serious allegations. We have developed and have administered a sexual misconduct climate survey, and the results are used to inform student, staff, and parent training. We've worked extensively with OCR to revise our policies regarding the UCP process, sexual harassment, and discrimination. We have implemented a system for centralizing the reporting of restraining orders and court documents. That was a problem that was pointed out in this report. In the past, these would go to schools, but not always to the district. Our manager of policy and legal compliance, who is one of my direct reports, receives, logs, and assures compliance with these official documents. We've even restructured our system for mail processing to assure that the superintendent and his executive assistant receive all mail addressed to the superintendent prior to any distribution. We've made district-level personnel changes and moved civil rights compliance from being one of an assistant superintendent's duties to being a full-time position. We are strengthening reporting requirements, but I think most importantly and most recently, we are working with a group of parents, with teachers, and students, an initiative that will reach everyone so that we do not have bystanders, so that we do have upstanders, so that we can assure that students are safe, that parents are safe when they need to report. We're looking to collaborate with this group of parents, as I learned from my recent outdoor open office hours sessions with gun students, to do anything but have sit and get sessions for teachers and for our staff. We need to have interactive training, we need to have peer mentoring, we need to have student and staff leadership. So I'm looking forward to continuing the efforts to acting quickly and thoroughly upon the recommendations of the Cozen O'Connor report. And again, I thank the legal team and everyone who came to speak today and look forward to hearing from the board members.
Thank you, Dr. McGee. Okay, colleagues, let's do comments and questions. Shall we do 5 5 minutes each. That seem all right? Mr. Collins, can I start with you?
Sure. Two questions. Dr. McGee, several people said that no Title IX.
Can you use your mic?
Several
Thanks.
people had said that no Title IX training was given to administrators before, what was it, spring of this year or summer?
Right, we had our most thorough training in May. So
Did administrators receive any training prior to that?
that's a question I'd have to ask our formal Title IX compliance trainer.
So you don't.
Let me
don't
put
know?
it this way, I did not. So my first training session, thorough training session was in May.
Okay.
Right.
Do you guys know anything about that?
So in the interview of Holly Wade, we asked that question, and we received documents from her that outline training about the board policies and the AR, which outlined discrimination and harassment requirements, the UCP requirements, sexual harassment requirements, as well as scenarios of sexual harassment. And so the Title IX training, it may not have been labeled Title IX training. In fact, I can bring it up. I think it was titled sexual, what was it called? Sexual harassment prevention training. Leslie has it up on the screen. She's good at that. But there was training that was sent to us in the form of emails, in the form of PowerPoints, in the form of follow-up emails. This one that Leslie has up was from August of 2016.
Okay, so.
There was.
Which was a year and a plus ago before these events took place.
About 2.5 months before these events took place.
Okay, so it sounds like there was appropriate training.
So, Mr. Collins, just to speak directly to, I'll read you the training outcomes from the PowerPoint presentation.
Briefly, if you can, if you may, because I only get 5 minutes
Information about the
regardless.
policy, what acts and behavior constitute sexual harassment, the need to report harassment, information about the district's procedures for investigating, and specifically the UCP, and information about the rights of students and parent guardians.
Okay, thank you. The second question, I think maybe for you guys is, the attorney who advised the district on this matter was Dora Dome, is that correct? I mean, she's obviously not an employee. We can't take discipline against her. Is it your view that we may have a claim against her for?
I know my area of expertise, how wide an inch and deep it is, a mile. Okay. And that question is outside of my area of expertise.
Fair enough. In that case, I've asked Dr. McGee in the past, and I don't think I've gotten any positive response on this, but I'd very much like to see the district investigate whether it is appropriate for us to make a claim against that law firm or lawyer, because if they actually gave us erroneous advice, that seems like an actionable claim, and our students and our institution have been damaged. So I would like to see us pursue that if we can. Is that possible, Dr. McGee?
Direction of the board, absolutely.
Why don't each of us kind of weigh in on that as we go around, see if we get a majority for that?
I guess just to conclude, how much, do I have any time left?
You have a minute
and 43
seconds.
I'll use it judiciously then. I'll see if I can come in under. I find this report sobering and saddening. It was a tale of, incredibly detailed and, seemed thorough and credible to me of our organization letting down students and a student being harmed because of our failure to follow policies and the law. We have a staff that's made up of good people. I don't think there's any doubt about that, who care about kids, and they have the resources and energy to do a good job. But something keeps them, and we have clear policies. I don't think the policies were deficient here, and it sounds like the training wasn't deficient. But we have a culture that's built up over many years that allows and even encourages these good people to not do what they need to do. And as as the attorneys described, this is in the face of years-long investigation by the Office of Civil Rights at this very campus on failure to do it in the past. So there's something systemic, there's something long-lasting, there's something that has to change. One thing that really drives organizational culture is what they call the tone at the top. When they look at Enron or Fannie Mae or even Baylor. I mean, it's that tone at the top about ethics and values that that tells the people in the organization what's okay, what's expected and what's not. I'll just wrap up very quickly. You know, that tone at the top is set by the people at this rostrum, and I think we need to change the way we address things and make sure we establish a tone at the top that is consistent with the kind of outcomes that our students deserve.
Thanks, Mr. Collins. Ms. DiBrienza.
Thanks. Gina and Leslie, thanks for the information about the training. I had a similar one, and I'm wondering, I have the impression that it was Holly Wade who did the training, who provided the training. Is that your impression?
Jennifer, I'd want to go back and look at the notes to be very clear about that, and we're certainly happy to give that information. We highlighted one training in August of 2016. There were other trainings, and what we know is that shortly after this incident, Holly Wade came back to the principals of the schools and said, now I want to make sure that you give training to all of your staff. So there was some trickle-down training initiatives, but there were other pieces that were more regular along the way, and in fact, there's a guidelines document that's given out to here's your guide to policy and procedures.
Okay. Thank you. My next question, similar to Mr. Collins, clearly there are some systemic problems that are happening that are not serving our students the way we need to be serving them, both legally and just in a moral way. And I'm wondering if you can help us. I'm hoping this is your narrow field of expertise. We have BPs in place. We believe we have training that's taken place. I'm looking forward to hearing who did it and when and who was there. And but it seems as though training is happening, but it doesn't seem to have been enough, right? We're still not doing it. So can you, in an effort to make sure the system works as intended, do you have a sense of what sort of accountability measures could be put in place to make sure that we're actually doing what we're supposed to be doing? Do you have suggestions there? You have worked at a lot of different sites. What do you find is in place at other places that maybe isn't in place here, besides the BPs and the training?
Sure.
What are we missing?
This is squarely in our expertise.
Awesome. Thank you.
So many schools put together a multidisciplinary team and come up with protocols of how they will respond when a case comes in. So there will be standardization around that. So we all know that no matter who gets it, the centralized place will get the information, and that will discharge either an email or some other form of communication to get the information to the core individuals that have to make decisions and evaluate what's happening. Some schools leverage Google Docs, some schools leverage Excel spreadsheets, some schools leverage software that helps model behavior and also, and importantly, document behavior in real time, document responsiveness in real time, document decision-making based on the available information, and will prompt next steps. So there are schools that are using either a Google Doc or a spreadsheet or a software to do that. That documentation process assures accountability. But I want to speak to kind of this compliance level of documentation, not just as a check the box, but as a commitment to buy-in that in documenting and checking those boxes of documentation, we're actually better serving our students because we have all the information in one place and we're not operating like silos.
The other thing that I would add to that is Title IX does have very specific training requirements that we must offer training to every employee and to every student. Within the group of employees, those who are designated as responsible employees get a higher level, and in the K-12 context, that's largely every employee who's not confidential by state statute. And then also training for students, training for volunteers, and training for those who come into contact. That's something that should be very strategic, constituents identified, content identified. OCR has been very clear about exactly what subject matters need to be taught, and that's something that can and should be tracked on a regular basis so that you as a board can understand at at Pally, we had X number of employees, X number of employees received this training. There certainly were stepped up efforts over the past year, but again, that needs to be documented and carefully followed through to ensure that it's covering the right content.
One of the things that comes out of that coordination is that you also create templates for offering services so that you know that every student who comes in gets the same level of service, that you know that in every case you've asked the question, is this a reportable child sexual offense? And that weaves into this. You know that in every case you're asking the question, is this a first-time occurrence, or is this a pattern or a trend of behavior that's escalating? So if you create those templates, you're in a position where you are consistently complying not only with the law, but your values.
Thank you. Ms. Baten-Caswell.
Well, first of all, I just want to say that the main reason that the board hired Cozen O'Connor to take a look at one incident was so that we actually could get an objective evaluation of what we were doing right and what we were doing wrong. And I'm saying this, I really appreciate people's emotions, and I understand how emotionally fraught this is, but our goal needs to be figuring out what we need to do differently so that we're not just following the law, but we're doing the right thing for all students. So I just want to sort of set that as a baseline. I think that this community has a lot of really good people. I really believe that people want to do the right thing, but wanting to do the right thing and having a system to make sure the right thing happens no matter what, sort of even when mistakes are made, are different. And to me, this is a challenge we have in a lot of areas, not just this. Operations are not glamorous. Following directions and checking the boxes on everything is not glamorous at all. But we need to do it. We're a very big organization now, and we can't expect, honestly, I don't believe that we can expect, even if we do really good training, that that's going to be enough. So one of the things that we've gotten advice on here is that, or information on, is that we are not documenting things properly. So one of the things, and was there any training that you heard about on how to document information or reports?
So there are two pieces that I want to share with that. One is it was shared with us that for some period of time, and I want to say many years, the training that was received by the administrators at Pally was not to document. And that was because of concerns about what could be publicly released. The other piece that I will share that is complicated, I think, for administrators to navigate is what information is confidential and what is not. Where can I share student information within the administration, within the district? And how do you maintain a student's confidence and yet still track your reporting obligations? And that is a very real struggle that individuals and administrators work with. The third thing that I will say is there is, in fact, some documents that we reviewed from Holly Wade that were documents sent to Pally staff that said you must document, and here are the ways in which you must document. At the same time as that document existed, Holly was very clear that she was not maintaining consistent documentation at the district level. That when this case, that I think Gina references, that when this case was called into her, that she did not document it, did not log it as a number, and did not kind of create it in the process because she viewed it as not Title IX, having made the factual determination in advance of the investigation that it was not Title IX. So the report has to be logged, and then you determine what occurred through the investigation.
So it sounds like in addition to Title IX and board policy and UCP and anti-harassment and, or sexual harassment and bullying training, we need to make sure that there's documentation training, that there's some process in place beyond just training on what are privacy concerns, because even if I'm trained on that, since I probably don't do it every single day, and I'm making myself a general person who might have to write up a report at some point, it seems like we need checks and balances on that. Somebody who actually is trained and has the authority to decide whether something is private or not needs to look at something before it's distributed. Does this sound right, or am I going overboard here?
No, Melissa, you're right on.
Okay.
And just, that speaks to Gina's comments about templates, intake protocols. If you've got questions that you're routinely answering, you're routinely documenting the relevant information.
And we need to designate who reviews it and what their authority is. I guess the last thing is, you talked about multidisciplinary teams at some districts, which sounds to me a little bit like doing simulations on situations, so that you actually have to act out simulations ahead of them happening, so that you have some experience. Am I understanding that?
That's absolutely right. In fact, what we do is pull the team together and we map out different scenarios, and we work through the policies, procedures, and processes to come up with protocols for those scenarios. We identify templates that attend to those scenarios, so that multidisciplinary tabletop work actually can be used even more broadly beyond discrimination and harassment, but for threat assessment and other scenarios that the institution has to respond to through different offices, such as your Title IX coordinator, your disciplinarian, and other offices in the institution.
Yeah, and I'm just going to say one last thing. When we talk about interactive training, I think we need to be much more specific than interactive training. I mean, these things need to be incorporated into what it means to not just set policy and systems, but also how we get people so they understand and feel comfortable.
And that's a training that E. Fichtner conducted, which, in that 6-hour session with John D. Paola, very similar to what Ms. Smith described. So, which is not the kind of training we had before, and it was highly effective and impactful.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Peyton-Castle. Mr. Dauber.
So when I look at this process that we're engaged in, I think back 4.5 years to the first OCR findings and resolution agreement, where many in the community called for exactly the process that we have now, which is an investigation of what happened and what the systemic issues were that might have given rise to the particular incidents at Terman that took place. And I think the failure to do that was a missed opportunity that has led to some of the issues that we're seeing now, the failure to correct those. But it also indicates that the process, I think, that we're engaged in here of being, as far as we can be, rigorously honest and transparent about the organization's obligations and responsibilities and where we have done well and where we haven't done well, that process is really critical to making progress. And I understand that the personnel implications of this loom large for many in the room, but I think that the real focus of this is understanding how to do better at this work as an organization and how to have a school district that really protects students by living the practice of compliance. So that is our focus, I think. What I have really learned, and just, you know, in reading the report and also in the conversation that we've had, one of the things is training without practice is not really useful. And I think that it certainly is the case that we haven't had a culture of compliance, but we really haven't had practices of compliance as concrete work that people are expected to do and to which they're accountable in the course of their day-to-day work. So when students experience harassment or discrimination, staff have not had access to an ongoing set of practices that if they enact those practices, the right thing will happen. And instead, what we see in the report is many staff members, as we heard, draw on their own good intentions to make decisions that are often right, sometimes wrong from the perspective of the law, but it doesn't guarantee students what they are entitled to under federal law and under state law and board policy, which is a consistent outcome that ultimately leads to the remedies that they need in order to pursue their educational program. And that's what we are on the hook for delivering, and that's what we have to do. And that requires really prosaic work by managers in the district to make sure that this happens. So that is what I am looking to our senior management, superintendent, assistant superintendents, chief academic officers, our compliance officer, and our principals to do. It is your responsibility, in my view, to enact those practices. So that to me is the lesson of this report, and it's late, but it is still urgent work to do. I did want to ask about the comment that you made about training around not documenting things. And I wonder if you could be clearer about that. The form that training took, the sources of it, the context in which it was delivered, how it was received. Can you tell us more about that? Because that's a particularly concerning part of it. Because obviously without documentation and clear communication, it's really hard to produce those reliable, repeatable practices.
So I've turned to Leslie, who has encyclopedic knowledge of the documents, to look in the interviews, but I can frame it for you that it came from interviews. We asked why there was no documentation. We asked why there were text messages or notes on a phone, and it was because there was a general practice and training that was shared in meetings to not put as much in writing. And in speaking with compliance officers around the country on this, we have seen a shift in expectation. That was viewed through the lens of civil litigation, often as not creating things that would hurt the institution. And civil litigators, and I'm loath to criticize where I don't walk, had often given that advice. And this is just me watching and seeing the shifts in compliance practices. So generally, that was out there. Did I give you enough time? Generally, that was out there. But we heard here that that practice was continued and spoken of outwardly, that we don't want to put that much in writing for student privacy or for fear that it would be requested through a public records request.
So just speaking to that very briefly, the training, as it was reported to us, came in principal meetings and came from cabinet was the term that was described. And essentially it was what Gina was speaking to, which is the concept that in a public school environment, that anything that was written could subsequently be released pursuant to a Public Records Act request, and that to be careful about what's documented. Now, I will tell you, as Gina framed, that there are sort of two pieces of advice out there that are not bad advice about documentation, and one is one that I teach everybody that I work with, is if you don't want to see it on the Sunday paper or your grandmother to read it, to not write it. So to be respectful, professional, to document the things that are relevant and not to use your district emails for lots of other purposes. That's a perfectly appropriate constraint to put on documentation. But to offer advice to not document reports of this nature because those documents could be discoverable was the problematic aspect. And it was training, as it was reported to us by the site administrators, that came from prior district level employees as to how we should document information.
When you say prior district level employees, what does that mean? Sorry.
So I want to check my notes to be accurate, but I believe it was partially the last Title IX coordinator and then the individuals in position before that as well. So this was not a recent thing. This was more longstanding that our custom and practice has been. And consequently, we found that your site level administrators did document things, but they documented them on their iPhones or personal notes to themselves, handwritten notes that they documented and kept, or dictating things that were kept in notes section on a phone that could later be retrieved, but did not constitute what we think of as a formal report or a formal set of documents that gets shared through all the appropriate channels and logged centrally at the Title IX coordinator's office as part of the UCP logger process.
So Dr. Miki, can you clarify for staff that that's
Sure.
not the appropriate?
Well, I have clarified it more than once in many situations, because the training that Ms. Gomez described as far as not using student names, not making insulting comments about parents, teachers, kids, the email was a professional way of communicating, and you needed to act like a professional. So I know our former communications director was very clear about that. My cabinet does not issue edicts, and they haven't issued edicts. I will tell you that we did have a former employee who was not a communications coordinator. He was above that, and that was a lesson that he had dispensed with some frequency, including coming to my office and saying, someone put this in email. What was that person thinking? And I said, well, it ought to be an email. This is an important matter, so let's get on to it. So this is something that was inherited. And again, our training, and no one has said don't use text messages instead of email. In fact, text messages are all discoverable. The training that we had after that law was passed the directive was to make sure you save your text messages. So I think you're absolutely right. It was a long-standing cultural practice and one we have worked to change. But obviously, there's more work to do.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dauber. Colleagues, can you indulge me for just a moment? I let you slip by. Mr. Collins had a request for input on his idea to pursue.
Well, I think we should. I'd love to hear, because we will do it if that is the will of the full board.
So the question that I have that maybe can't be answered until there actually is some sort of investigation into it is we don't know actually what the Store Dome was told, right? She may have been told by our compliance officer, hey, listen, this is a consensual thing, should it be investigated? Mm-hmm. Which might not sound so crazy for Ms. Dome to say no. So we don't really know what that phone conversation was. It does seem reasonable to try to find that out, to find out if we need to notify someone else that improper information is going out there. But I am aware that it's very possible that she actually gave sound legal advice based on what she was told over the phone about the incident. We just don't know.
Do you have any input on that, Ms. Caswell?
You know, my feeling on this is, one, we don't want somebody that is supposedly protecting children across the country, or at least across California, to be repeating wrong advice. We don't want that. On the other hand, I don't want this to be a big effort of ours. I think our effort needs to be to get our operations cleaned up, to reflect on what's happened rather than jump to, we didn't do it. I think we need to carefully reflect and we need to make changes. That's where I'd like to spend the majority of our effort. If there's a way to do this in a way that won't distract us, I would encourage it only to make sure that if there was bad advice given by a legal professional, that bad advice doesn't go to the next user of that legal professional.
Thanks. Okay, that's 3.
Thank you.
Mr. Arun.
Thank you.
Sorry. She's moving along.
It's 5:45. I'm sorry.
You have to change your seat, I guess.
Thank you so much for your presentation. I read the report last night, and today really cleared up a lot of things about it. I do have a few questions. First of all, I don't know if you already answered this, but was there a reason for the practice to not formally document any of these reports?
So your question actually raises 2 things for me. One was the fear and the distrust that things would be released.
Okay.
Right? So there was that piece. There was also some concern that was expressed about distrust of the board. At various times. I did reference that there was an early Holly Wade memo, and I was able to pull that memo up, and it's I want to read you just very brief elements of it. It's dated September 10th of 2015, 1/5, so a year before this incident. It's a memorandum to all administrative staff speaking about the requirement to maintain a log of complaints as well as a record of actions taken by the district in response to each complaint. And Ms. Wade says very clearly, interviews and other information gathered will be documented, and documentation of complaints and their resolution will be maintained for a minimum of 2 years. The default is that all sexual harassment complaints or any complaint alleging discriminatory harassment, for that matter, would automatically be handled utilizing the UCP process. Therefore, all discriminatory harassment complaints, regardless of whether they are handled through the UCP or resolved through informal levels, should be reflected in the log of complaints. I reviewed your log. I believe it contains the required information, and the record of actions taken can be viewed as the individual file that's created. So there's some, I guess, mixed messages around documentation. This is one that suggests that it should be done, and yet Ms. Wade told us herself that she was not documenting consistent with the directives of this memo.
Okay. My second question, is there a set policy or a set of procedures for how often Title IX training should occur? Because I know last time you mentioned that there was a training in May 2017 and there was also training in August 2016. And I'm wondering, do we have a consistent schedule for these trainings?
There is no consistent schedule that we became aware of through this review. And even if you look to the federal guidance, they're not that prescriptive.
Okay.
It has to be effective, it has to be informed, it has to contain certain elements, but the federal government doesn't dictate it either.
Okay, so I think consistency is something we should work towards, especially in terms of training.
Just one last, there was also a training on December 8th of 2016 and many other trainings over the course of the year. So we've given you sort of anecdotal snapshot pieces of the training.
Okay. All right. My third question is, so I know you guys mentioned that the superintendent, Dr. Begay, said that the UCP might be necessary in the case of the event that happened last September or October. Now, when exactly on the timeline was this? Was this before or after the attorney gave us erroneous information?
Before.
The external attorney?
Before.
Okay, before. Okay. So I think that might have influenced the rest of the procedures. So yeah, thank you for answering my questions. My general comments are, I mean, I heard the phrase once, legitimacy is both policy and process. And I feel like if we want to make, you know, a more safe district, a district with legitimate rules, I think we not only need to set down the right policies, which I think we've been working on for the past few months, but also process is extremely important. And I feel like, especially the ideas of having simulations, I think those are actually super important. And I feel like, you know, just getting staff to know what scenarios could come up, I think that would be super beneficial to all of us. In general, in reading the report, I feel like there's a lot of lack of oversight in terms of the policies that we had already. And I feel like now that we know that that's happened, I feel like everyone here is pretty aware of how we failed in that regard. So I guess now we can move on and look to actually not only making the policy better, but also strengthening the process to make sure that policy stays in place, stays correct. Aside from that, I really don't think I have too many other comments. And I just, yeah, now that we know what went wrong, I think we have a much better opportunity to remedy all of this for the future, policy and process. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Roon. And Ms. Smith and Ms. Gomez, I think I was remiss. I did not introduce you to our two student board members. Mr. Arun is a senior at Gunn High School, and Mr. Islas is a senior at Palo Alto High School. So Mr. Islas, questions or comments?
I have a long comment.
You have 5 minutes.
Yeah. Good evening, everyone. My name is Richard Islas. I go to Palo Alto High School. I am the student board representative, and I am a student leader. Board, I ask you for one thing, is to hear the student voice. Because it may not affect the parents, it may not affect the staff, but it will affect the students. For all the people that say Ms. DiOrio has done nothing for this school, I come here to inform you that you are extremely wrong. When I was a freshman, seniors came up to me and said, "Oh, I can't wait for the streaking to start, for the naked people to run around campus." Just imagine your 14-year-old daughter walking around campus as a freshman, as an 18-year-old runs past her naked. Just imagine that. Now, Ms. DiOrio has made it her mission to put an end to this disgusting act. And I believe she has accomplished. Now, when I came in as a freshman, there was no talk about suicide prevention. Now in ASB, student government, there is 2 positions for suicide prevention. Now in every corner we turn, there is someone with their arms extended out, trying to help us. This was only possible by the administration and the principal. This was only possible with the board that chose Ms. Diorio, the principal of a high school ranked top 5. Now, for the administrators that are not here and the principal that are not here because they feel threatened, I say Pally stands with you. God bless and thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you, Mr. Islas. Okay, so I agree with what my colleagues have said, all of my colleagues. What I see sort of emerging here is we're at the point of understanding and acknowledging. I realize that there's more work to do on the individual cases you're working on, so I look forward to the recommendations that you can add to this when you're finished with that work. I think we've already made the decision that we need a dedicated Title IX coordinator, and I think that's so important and it has already borne fruit.
Yes, it has.
The UCP reports are up. Now, that might be horrifying, but it also, I think, acknowledges that many of them are from prior months where students or families didn't feel comfortable or didn't have the opportunity, and now we have a way to say, we understand what's out there, and we're going to go after what's out there and figure out what's wrong. As a unintended consequence of that, we also are starting to see some trends in those reports that I think are important to us. If we see trends that a lot of this behavior is happening off campus, we need to go after that. If we see this behavior is happening in a certain subset of students, we have to go after that. So I think as part of the larger picture, I think we will be better at this as we understand better what the issues are. I think our new law firm has really shown their strength in this area, and I think that they will be great. Can never remember their letters, or AALRR, I believe. But particularly Eve at that firm is very good. Our resolution agreement is underway. I know you play a big role in Section E of that resolution agreement. We have someone on staff who's marching through all of the dates and timelines and things that we have to get done. So I expect that we're going to have from that, I hope, a clean bill of health. But all this talk about the process, the tools for our staff to understand what has to happen next and what has to, how these things work so that we don't lose sight of the kids who are affected, feels like we're going to get there. I feel like our next steps are taking this back, taking it apart, taking the recommendations from there and figuring out how we get that culture of compliance in place with the tools that we need to do it. And then the second part is the culture of care, where our students feel comfortable approaching their teachers, their administrators, whatever other staff, that their friends feel comfortable approaching, and that we have honest and frank conversations about consent early. I think we need to look at living skills, because seniors taking living skills and talking about sex is too late. We can't talk about sex in 5th grade, 7th grade, and again in 12th grade. Can we please talk about it earlier? Can we talk about it for what it is, just a fact of life, and understand how, I mean, if this was easy, we could just tell kids, don't bully each other and don't sexually assault each other, and we'd be done. Unfortunately, it's not easy. So our ability to understand and acknowledge and move on and get this work done is, as you can see, important to me and important to all of us. I'm grateful for the work that you've done. I know that we pestered you over the summer, and I know that good work is better than fast work. So I appreciate having this with us tonight. That's it for comments from me. If anybody else has something else they'd like to get out there, I'm happy to do that. If not, we can have another session to talk about this another time when we have a little more information. I think I see a finger over there.
I just want to say something because we have so much staff here. We have to make sure that we have processes in place so that everyone understands what their responsibility is and feels safe following that responsibility and feels good about documenting and following that responsibility. I think that's one of the things that's come out here as well.
Thank you.
I just had one more.
Yes.
I would like, this has been a very useful focus on this particular incident. I would like us soon to get a report from either our Title IX compliance officer or the superintendent about the status of previous cases where we had issues. I'm thinking of the Title IX report in the case of Mr. Farrell, you know, and other cases where I'd like to understand how we are in terms of bringing ourselves into a state of compliance with those past issues.
Certainly, and I know that's part of Section E of that resolution agreement, so we will get back to you quickly on that.
Thank you.
Do you have anything else you'd like to add?
Thank you.
Okay. Good night, Shana Tova.